Legacy, the sculptors of an era. Of all the figures who loom over the world of One Piece, none cast a longer shadow than Gol D. Roger and Edward Whitebeard Newgate. These two men were the strongest pirates of their era, rivals, foils, and in many ways, two halves of a singular ideal. Roger, the pirate king who attained everything the world had to offer, and Whitebeard, the strongest man in the world who wanted none of it except family. Together, their lives, deaths, and final words set every event of the series into irrevocable motion. Their stories begin from radically different origins and converge into an era-defining rivalry, only to diverge again in death. These two genuinely were larger than life, large enough so with each departure reshaping the world in a fundamentally different way. Roger's execution on the scaffold at Logtown ignited the great pirate era, a single moment of defiance that sent hundreds of thousands of people rushing to sea in search of treasure and glory. Whitebeard's death at Marineford, riddled with hundreds of wounds yet standing upright, confirmed that the Great Pirate Era was real, that the One Piece existed, and that the age Roger had begun was not yet finished. Together, they form a complete narrative, the narrative that drives the story itself. The foundation of the story we all adore and love is, in a way, held up by these two, the birth and validation of an age that now defines the world of One Piece, Roger's spark and Whitebeard's endorsement. The Great Pirate Era we're currently in is a shared legacy, and I can't help but not make a video about it. To understand Roger and Whitebeard, you must first understand the world that preceded them. So spoilers for Elbaf, since I kinda need to talk about God Valley here. The world that came before them was a world dominated not by either of them, but by Roxy Zebek and the Rocks Pirates. The Rocks Pirates were, before their dissolution at the God Valley incident 38 years before the current story, the most dangerous and strongest pirate crew of their time, a ship of barely contained monsters that included a young Edward Newgate, alongside Charlotte Linlin, Kaido, and others, all nominally serving under Zebek's banner of absolute world domination. The interesting and crucial thing here is that Whitebeard's time aboard the Rocks Pirates is what he took away from it. He did not take away ideology. He did not absorb Rock's ambition. He took away a lesson in negative space, what a crew should not be. The Rocks Pirates were a crew without camaraderie, without loyalty, without anything resembling a family. They were a collection of supreme powers held together by fear and ambition, and Whitebeard, even then, found this insufficient. By his own account, he rarely spoke of his time on the Rocks Pirates except in a negative tone. He joined after losing a Davy Back fight. He was a member of the most powerful crew in history, and hated everything about the experience. This is where Whitebeard's true philosophy was born. He had been among the worst possible version of a pirate crew, and he knew with absolute certainty what he did not want to replicate. The God Valley incident, 38 years before the current story, ended the Rocks era. The Roger Pirates and the Marines under Garp combined forces to dismantle the Domi Reversed Rocks, an alliance that resulted in Rock's death and the disbanding of his pirates. Roger was the man who broke the era Whitebeard was born into. The question that sits underneath everything that follows is, did Whitebeard understand this? Did he feel freed by Roger's dismantling of Rocks? Or did he feel something more complicated? A strange debt owed to the man who ended the only world he had known, however much he had hated it. Our first confirmed direct encounter between Gol D. Roger and Edward Newgate in the Oden flashback is not a fight that resolves in the expected way. When the Roger Pirates intercept the Whitebeard Pirates, Roger and Whitebeard clash, and their collision of Supreme King Haki is so immense that it splits the sky, flattens the surrounding forest, and physically moves the Moby Dick from the coast. This is the series' most explicit visual declaration of what happens when these two men meet with intent. The world moves. The battle lasts 3 days and 3 nights. Neither crew wins, neither captain falls. On the 4th day, a ceasefire is called. The loot is split equally between the two crews, and what began as a war becomes something indistinguishable from a reunion. The crews talk, they laugh, they exchange plunder. The draw is the most important result, not because neither could win, though that's true, but because the draw meant something to both of them. They fought for 3 days and neither won, and then they sat down and drank together. That is the whole relationship, stated in one gesture. After the ceasefire, Roger requests something that reveals more about his character than almost any other moment in the series. He bows to Whitebeard, the future pirate king, bowing, and asks to borrow Oden for a year. He does not fight for it. He offers all the treasure and supplies his crew had obtained. He gives away everything he has earned, materially, and asks for something he cannot get any other way. Roger needed Oden to read the road poneglyphs. Oden was Whitebeard's 2nd Division commander, and by every principle Whitebeard lived by, irreplaceable. One of his brothers, one of his people, someone he had protected and fought alongside and trusted. The man whose entire philosophy was organized around the idea that you do not let your people go, was being asked to let one of them go. And Whitebeard, initially enraged by the request, furious at the very concept, eventually agreed. The Odin loan is arguably the act that made the entire story possible. Whitebeard understood that Roger's journey was important in a way that transcended crew loyalty, that something larger than either of them was pulling toward Laughtail, and that blocking it would be a different kind of wrong than any wrong he could name. He had no interest in the One Piece himself, but he may have been capable of recognizing the weight of what Roger was chasing even without sharing the compulsion. Before turning himself into the Marines, Roger made one final voyage. He was dying. The disease had already taken whatever fighting years he had left. He had already disbanded the Roger Pirates, releasing his crew voluntarily. Before walking to the scaffold, Roger visited Whitebeard one last time, which shows the content of their meeting in Whitebeard's final moments at Marineford. Roger offered to share the location of Laughtail. Whitebeard turned him down, saying treasure was not what he was after. Roger then noted, pointedly, deliberately, that everyone was calling him Gold Roger, but his name was Goldie Roger. Whitebeard asked about the D, and Roger told him, off-panel, everything about the will of D, the meaning of that initial, the inheritance it represented. Roger shared it with Whitebeard, and Whitebeard carried it for the rest of his life. Rouge was approximately 3 to 5 months pregnant at the time of Roger's execution. Roger would have known about the pregnancy. He would have known there was a child coming. Whether he mentioned this to Whitebeard at their final meeting is not known, but I doubt it. What is confirmed is that Roger asked Garp, separately, to protect the child, passing that responsibility to his greatest enemy turned complex ally. Whitebeard was trusted with something different, the philosophical inheritance, the meaning behind the initial that would one day appear on Roger's son's arm as a mark the government wanted to erase. People often get this wrong, misinterpreting that Roger informed Whitebeard about his expected child. But no, he told Whitebeard why the child would matter. He explained the will of D, the generational thread, the inherited resistance, the pattern in history that kept producing people who would stand up to the world's structures and refuse to accept its version of itself as final. He gave Whitebeard not a specific child to protect, but a framework for recognizing the right kind of person when they appeared. And then, years later, a young man with a D in his name showed up at Whitebeard's ship and tried to kill him 100 times, failed every time, and refused to leave. The man Roger had told about the will of D found himself looking at someone who embodied it perfectly. Whether or not Whitebeard knew Ace was Roger's blood is beside the point. He recognized what Ace was. Roger had given him the vocabulary to do exactly that. Roger chose Whitebeard as his final confidant, not Rayleigh, his first mate, his closest crewmate, though he did have some private words after they disbanded which made Rayleigh cry. But Whitebeard, the man he had never beaten, Roger, who was laughing at everything, who was walking to the scaffold, who had made his peace with the world, went to Whitebeard's last. Roger wanted to know, not to rule. The title of Pirate King was, for Roger, almost incidental, the administrative consequence of doing what he actually wanted to do, which was get to the end of the Grand Line and find out what was there. He wanted to read the poneglyphs, to understand the Void Century, to find Laughtail and stand on the beach of the world's most guarded secret. His want pointed outward, toward the horizon, toward the unreachable, toward the truth that the world government had spent centuries bearing. He was a man defined by appetite for knowing, and the knowing was the point, not the destination. Whitebeard wanted to feel. He was an orphan on Sphinx Island, raised without a family by a world that had no structural interest in keeping him alive. The thing he wanted, and it is so simple, so devastating in its simplicity, was for someone to call him father. He wanted warmth. He wanted sons. He wanted to sit at a table surrounded by people who chose to be there, not because of obligation or politics, but because they loved him, and because he had built something worth loving. His want pointed inward, toward the ship, toward the already reachable, toward the thing he had constructed with his own hands and his own capacity for fierce, protective love. Now I'm gonna need you guys to hold them against each other. The man who wanted the world ended up changing it by leaving it. 14 words from a scaffold, and the world tilted on its axis, and every pirate who ever lived after Roger's execution was a downstream effect of those words. He seeded the Great Pirate Era not by arriving at his destination, but by announcing its existence and dying before he could stop anyone from going there themselves. He wanted the world, and in trying to possess it, he released it. The man who wanted nothing except his people ended up reshaping global politics by dying for one of them. The death of Whitebeard at Marineford, a single old man refusing to abandon one adopted son, refusing to leave the battlefield until his body literally failed, shattered the four emperors' balance that had kept the new world stable. Empowered Blackbeard, triggered the second half of the entire series. He wanted warmth, and in protecting it to the last, he changed the temperature of the whole world. Neither of them got what they wanted in the way they imagined it. Roger found Laugh-Tale and discovered he was dying before he could act on it. Whitebeard built his family and watched them die at Marineford, one by one, beginning with Ace. The series is merciless about this. It does not let either philosophy arrive at its natural conclusion without cost. The Horizon cost Roger his life before he could do anything with what he found there. The home cost Whitebeard everyone he had built the home for. And yet, the convergence, when you look for it, is precise and almost unbearable. Both of them, at the end, were fighting for the same thing, that the next generation would have the space to be free. Roger made that space by breaking the ceiling, by proving the ceiling existed, by naming it, by inviting the world to come find it. Whitebeard protected it by refusing to let the ceiling be rebuilt, by standing at Marineford and demonstrating with his body that the government could not simply execute its way back to power without paying a price that the world would remember forever. These two single-handedly took two different directions, but with the same compass bearing. Goldie Roger had no devil fruit. In a world where the most catastrophic weapons are fruits eaten centuries ago, where entire political architectures are built around who swallowed what and when, Roger rose to the absolute pinnacle of piracy on the strength of nothing except himself, his will, his hockey, the force of his self, exerted against the world until the world bent. He did not have Whitebeard's world-ending seismic power. He had no natural disaster at his disposal. He had no ability to crack the earth open or summon tsunamis. He had one of the most powerful expressions of conqueror's hockey in recorded history, and he used it to get to the end of the world. His entire crew did. For Roger, strength was instrumental. It was the thing that let him reach Laugh-Tale. It was not the point of itself. He would use it, absolutely, but the power existed in service of the search. When the search was done, the power became irrelevant. He disbanded his crew, not because they lost their strength, but because the thing the strength was for had been accomplished. Meanwhile, Whitebeard had the Gura Gura no Mi, the power to literally shake the world. The fruit is described by Fleet Admiral Sengoku as possessing the power to destroy the entire planet, and yet, he spent his entire life not using it that way. He used the world-ending fruit to protect people on a ship. He used the power that could collapse coastlines to stand between his sons and what was coming for them. He created the most elaborate possible gap between what he could do and what he chose to do, and maintained that gap for decades. Rather than his strength being a title, it was a responsibility. He carried it the way a man carries a weapon he hopes never to have to use. Always present, always ready, but never casual, never performative, never deployed for its own sake. The world-ending power held in check by world-sustaining love. Now dedicate two portraits in your minds for these two goats. Roger had less destructive potential than Whitebeard and used it to reach further. Whitebeard had more destructive potential than almost anyone in history, and used it to stay close. Freedom of movement versus stability of presence. The man with no supernatural gift went to the end of the world. The man who could break the world stayed home. This was deliberate. The fruitless man is the one who goes farthest. The man with the ultimate weapon is the one who stays. And then consider when they clashed. 3 days, the heavens splitting, the forest flattening. Their power was equal. Strength as freedom and strength as protection produced identical output in direct collision. These two orientations toward power, when fully expressed, cannot overcome each other. Not because they are equal in brute force, but because they are equivalent in commitment. Roger was as committed to the horizon as Whitebeard was to the home. The fight could not have any other outcome. The draw is the argument. The two answers to what is strength for. Freedom and love, movement and protection, are not in a hierarchy. They are in a balance, and the series has been testing that balance ever since. Roger's death was a performance, not in the cynical or theatrical sense, but in the sense that it was staged. He chose the time, the words, the manner of dying. He turned himself in. He walked up there with a disease already killing him from the inside, and he looked at a crowd that had come to watch him die, and he laughed. 14 words, or 12, depending on your translation. The Pirate King had obtained everything the world had to offer, and you want the treasure? Go find it. It is all there. I left everything in one place. He died by giving away everything he had, including the manner of his dying. The execution was his last act of freedom. It was the final proof that the world government, which thought it was staging a deterrent, had not controlled Roger at all. He converted their instrument of intimidation into the series' inciting event. He stepped onto the scaffold of his own accord and turned it into a launching pad. He released himself, and in releasing himself, released an era. Whitebeard's death was a presence, physical, prolonged. The body as an argument. 267 sword wounds, 152 bullets, 46 cannonballs, a magma fist through the chest, twice from a Kainu, the man who had just killed Ace, half his head blasted away by Blackbeard's reality warping power. He absorbed all of it and remained vertical. When every rational, physical, biological reason to fall had been satisfied and exceeded, he remained standing. He died on his feet, facing forward, while his enemies looked on in something that was very close to fear. Not a single wound on his back. In a story about pirates, people who are, structurally, supposed to run, who are defined by their capacity to sail away from danger, to choose the sea over the stand. He never ran, not once in his entire life as a pirate. Every wound he ever took came from the front, because he was always moving toward the thing that was trying to kill him, not away from it. And with his final words, he yelled with everything he had that the One Piece is real. The words of reassurance. More gasoline to the fire Roger ignited. Roger released everything. Whitebeard refused to fall. Roger left the world a message. Whitebeard left the world with reassurance to that exact message that Roger left. Together, they constitute the complete argument. Freedom is worth pursuing, and love is worth protecting, and neither conclusion comes without cost. Roger's legacy is information. Specifically, it is a location and a challenge. The One Piece is real. It is findable. Go find it. But at the deeper level, it is the will of D, the inherited will. The idea that the dreams of the dead are transmissible across generations without blood or formal instruction. His ghost is in every arc without him appearing in any. He is the reason Luffy left Dawn Island. He is the reason the Grand Line is full of pirates. He is the reason the series has a plot at all. His legacy lives in minds, in the imaginations of everyone who heard those 14 words and decided that the sea was where their life was supposed to happen. Whitebeard's legacy is people. His sons survived him. Scattered, diminished, grief-stricken, but alive and still caring about each other. Marco, Vista, Yozu, thousands of men who called him father and meant it, who did not stop meaning it after he died, who showed up at Marineford because he was their father and fathers are worth dying for. His legacy lives in bodies, in the structure of belonging he built, in the relationships he maintained, in the model of a crew as family that continues to shape how the series thinks about what a crew is for. The One Piece is real. He died making a statement of fact about Roger's legacy. Whitebeard, the man who chose never to pursue the One Piece personally, spent the last air his lungs could hold, confirming it for the world. He became, in dying, Roger's final witness. The man who stayed home spent his last breath telling the world that the horizon was real. Think about what that costs. Think about what that means. Roger entrusted the secret to Whitebeard because Whitebeard would hold it, and Whitebeard held it his entire life. And then, at the end, when holding it no longer served anyone, he released it. The man who never let go. In death, Whitebeard finally did the thing Roger had been doing his whole life. He pointed at the horizon and said go. And now I'm going to talk about Ace. Since in a section of this video called Legacy, we kinda need to bring him up. Roger knew Ace would be hunted. He knew that the son of the Pirate King would be born into a world that had already decided he was a threat. So he chose absence. He gave up the right to be present in his child's life before that child was born. He asked Rouge to give the boy a different name. Portgas D. Ace. He walked to the scaffold without meeting him. He made Garp his guardian, a Marine of all people. The man who hunted him across the Grand Line. Specifically because the Marine's protection was what the boy would need most. Whitebeard chose presence, but ironically, he did not know, at first, whose blood Ace carried. He took him in as a son not by inheritance, but by merit, by character, by the shape of what Ace was becoming. When the truth eventually became clear, that this was Roger's son, his old rival's child, the boy whose existence Roger had entrusted to him in that final island meeting, he kept him anyway. He held on to what Roger had let go of. He did the only thing his nature was capable of. He loved the child directly, without conditions. You kinda see Oda expressing the parallel between Roger and Whitebeard through Ace here. The same child, two fathers, two completely opposite expressions of love. And then Ace died at Marineford, in front of the father who held on, killed by the institution that hunted him because of the father who let go. Both loves, Roger's sacrificial absence and Whitebeard's fierce presence, were present at Marineford. But unfortunately, neither was enough. This is without a doubt one of the most devastating things Oda has ever put on paper, and he wrote it without calling attention to it. He did not put it in a speech, he put it in the structure of the event. Ace died at the intersection of both his father's philosophies. He died because Roger had released him, and he died in front of Whitebeard who had held him. The absence and the presence converged at a Marine execution, and neither of them could stop it. Whitebeard's response, in his final moments, is this video's most significant evidence about what these two men actually built together. After Ace dies, Whitebeard keeps fighting, keeps absorbing the impossible tally of damage, and keeps standing. And when he finally speaks his last words, they are not about himself. They are about Roger, about Roger's legacy, about the flame that Roger started, about the will that cannot be extinguished by bloodline or execution or war. Then he gave us this speech. It has been passed down like that since ancient times. Someday one will arise who will challenge the world and shoulder centuries of history. Sengoku, you and the world government fear the great war that will come to this world one day. I'm not interested in the treasure. but when it's found, the whole world will be turned upside down. He died making the most powerful argument for Roger's philosophy in the history of the series. The man who stayed home, who never chased the horizon, who kept the secret and held the sun and built the family. He spent his last breath confirming that the horizon was real and that the chase was right. Whitebeard carrying Roger's torch on the battlefield where the government thought they had finally put it out. Their relationship ended here, on a burning battlefield, with the father who held on affirming the vision of the father who let go. And the funny thing is, both legacies point at Luffy. Roger's map is what Luffy is sailing toward. Whitebeard's family, the model of fierce, unconditional, chosen family, is what Luffy has already built, without knowing he was building it. The Straw Hats are Whitebeard's answer to the question of what a crew should be, carried forward by a boy who never served on the Moby Dick. The One Piece is Roger's answer to the question of what the sea is for, pursued by a boy who was not there when the question was originally asked. Luffy synthesizes both without knowing either man. Roger laughs at everything. This is his defining register, the laugh that terrified Marines, that confused Garp, that echoes through the series whenever someone hears it coming from Luffy and suddenly understands something about the world they did not know before. The laugh is the outward expression of Roger's orientation to life. Everything is interesting, everything is an adventure, even death, even a scaffold, even the disease consuming him from the inside. He met the world with delight. Whitebeard does not laugh at serious things. His warmth is enormous, his affection genuine and fierce and without reservation, but he does not treat the things that matter as material for entertainment. When Marco is in danger, he does not laugh. When Ace is threatened, he does not laugh. His gravity around what he loves is as complete as Roger's delight around everything. The two men's emotional registers are as different as their philosophies. Roger points at the horizon. Whitebeard stands between his crew and what is coming for them. Roger disbands his crew because the adventure is complete. Whitebeard would never disband his crew because the family is the adventure. And if you really think about it, Luffy does all of it simultaneously. He laughs at everything. The laugh that makes Rayleigh's eyes go strange. The laugh that sounds like Roger's. The laugh that Shanks had heard before somewhere and could not quite place until he could. And he refuses to let anyone he loves be taken. He chased the horizon since chapter 1 and he walked into Marineford with nothing because his brother was there. He will sacrifice the horizon for the home. He will walk away from the treasure hunt to stand at the execution ground. He absorbs every consequence of absolute freedom because the people around him are what freedom is for. He is not Roger's heir. Roger's heir would be a man who could give up the things he loved in service of the horizon, who could release his crew and walk toward death with his hands open. Luffy cannot do that. Luffy cannot let go. He walked to Marineford. He would do it again. The idea of choosing the horizon over Zoro or Nami or Ace would simply not compute. He is not Whitebeard's heir either. Whitebeard's heir would be a man who built his world around staying, who found his island and his ship and his people and planted himself there. Luffy keeps sailing. He was always going to keep sailing. The Thousand Sunny is pointed at the One Piece, not at a home port. He is the synthesis. He is the thing that neither of them, alone, could fully be, because the era they lived in required them to choose. And Luffy is the first person in the series who refuses to. He takes Roger's joy and Whitebeard's loyalty and wears them at the same time without feeling any contradiction. Because for Luffy, the contradiction does not exist. The horizon and the home are the same thing. Freedom and love are not intention. He wants to be the freest man in the world, and he will absorb every consequence of that freedom to protect the people around him. He has never once had to choose. He has never once felt the pull of the binary that split Roger and Whitebeard into two answers instead of one. And another thing worth mentioning here, Luffy's and Roger's true dream. Not simply Pirate King, but their real dream. The one that lies ahead of that. Oda offscreens Roger's true goal when he speaks it to Whitebeard and Odin in chapter 966. The same technique used for Luffy's true dream throughout the series. The implication, widely talked about, is that Roger and Luffy share the same deepest dream. Not merely to be Pirate King, but something more radical. Something about the nature of freedom itself. If this does stand to be true, Luffy does not merely inherit Roger's will. He carries Roger's actual dream. The one Roger knew he could not complete, and attempts to complete it in a world that Roger's death made possible. The plot is built around Roger's legacy. The One Piece is Roger's mystery. The Void Century is the thing Roger found and encoded. The Pirate Age, the Will of D, the Inherited Dream, the Race to Laugh Tale, all of it is Roger's architecture. Whitebeard's legacy, for all its emotional weight, is local. It is the Whitebeard Pirates, and the man who came from them and the structure of chosen family that persists in every good crew that follows. It is essential, but it is not the series' engine. Go, discover, find the truth, The horizon is real, shown through Roger, is the series engine. Everything moves, because he said so. And the thing I need to bring up before I wrap the video up is this. Roger's answer alone is insufficient. It is lonely. It produces the Great Pirate Age. Yes. And the Great Pirate Age is also full of Doflamingos and Blackbeards and every predatory opportunist who heard those 14 words and decided that freedom from the government meant freedom from everyone else. Roger's answer without Whitebeard's correction produces a world of isolated geniuses and empty horizons. It produces the coldness that Roger himself could not sustain, which is why he went to Whitebeard of all people, with his last secret. He needed the warmth. He needed someone to hold the thing he could not hold himself. Whitebeard's answer alone is insufficient too. It is static. It produces love and warmth and the most genuinely human family dynamic in the series. And it produces 16 divisions of men who will never go past the new world, who will mourn their father and scatter into the sea and never complete anything larger than themselves. Whitebeard's answer without Roger's provocation produces a world of beautiful, stable, insufficient things. It produces homes without destinations. It produces love without a reason to risk it. But if you mix these two together, you get Monkey D. Luffy. And in doing so, Luffy makes their philosophies obsolete. Luffy demonstrates that the question was contingent, that it was the specific limitation of Roger and Whitebeard's era that forced the binary. They lived in a world where you had to choose because the world was not yet built to hold both. Roger's era required someone to break the ceiling. Whitebeard's era required someone to stand under the ceiling and hold it while it was broken. The synthesis, freedom and love, horizon and home, could only come after both tasks were done. Luffy is the first person to live in the world that Roger and Whitebeard built by being exactly what they were. He is the third option that their opposition made possible. He found the thing neither of them could reach alone. He did it by refusing to acknowledge that it was a choice. The two men who made this world, the man who broke its ceiling and the man who held its floor, gave it, between them, everything it needed. The one man who would, without being instructed, hold the world in the shape it needed to be until the right person arrived. That is the relationship. That is the story. That is the load-bearing architecture the entire series rests on. The legacy of the two goats that shaped this entire story, we know and love. Roger made the world want things. Whitebeard made the world willing to die for things. Luffy refused to choose between the two. And the story is still going.